Welcome back to my review of the Atlantic Provinces tour. This is part 2, where we'll be reviewing Newfoundland. Newfoundland is delightful, and as you do your own tour here, I suspect you're going to love it. We started our tour at the northern tip of the Great Northern Peninsula, and then worked our way south and then east to the Avalon Peninsula. There are no roads of any note in the south central area of Newfoundland. This is not the interior of Labrador. Newfoundland has its areas of low population, but you're never too far away from a town. One activity people enjoy is whale watching, and on our boat trip out of St. Anthony, or Stantony as the locals call it, it would have been successful if our boat had left port a half hour later than it did. The problem is that the whale watching was pretty well late in the season at that time. The ideal date for whale watching is between mid-July and mid-August, so if that's something you'd like to do, that's the ideal time for you. Grossmoor National Park is the second largest national park in the Atlantic Provinces. Number 1 is Torngat Mountains National Park, which is in the far north of Labrador and not accessible by automobile. Oh, no, not by a long shot. Grossmoor is much easier to access. We only passed through and spent no longer than one afternoon hiking the tablelands. But there are about 20 marked day trails available, exploring coastal and interior areas of the park. One of the more strenuous day hikes is a 16-kilometer hike over Grossmoor Mountain. If something even more challenging is what you enjoy, try the long-range traverse, the 3 or 4 day, 35-kilometer long hike through the interior of the park. Be warned, Parks Canada has to rescue hikers every year from this trek. I think that a hike of 35 kilometers, which you might actually imagine would take 2 days or so, actually takes 3 or 4. And that's an indicator of its difficulty. Our stop in Springdale was another night stop where we were not camping and in a town, and yet we were not able to find any place to eat. This was like Labrador City, but here even the Tim Hortons was closed, perhaps permanently. Springdale is not that close to any other town, so traveling for a meal wasn't possible. The hotel had a restaurant, but it was closed that night. So we boiled up some sausages in our bathroom on the propane camping stove, and it worked out. It was one of the few hotels rooms that we stayed in that didn't have a microwave, and frankly, I don't know where they would have put one, as the room was extremely cramped. But I don't want to criticize the hotel too vigorously. The price was right. Gander was a thrill to see, mainly because this is ground zero for the general and generous response of Canadians to the horror of 9/11. Gander was not unique in their open arms, as Goose Bay, Labrador accepted the first 7 aircraft, and 14 other airports across Canada also accepted all incoming aircraft. But Gander's response was impressive in that it's not a large town, and the 6,600 new arrivals increased the town's population by more than 50%. Come From Away is a musical you want to see if you've not already seen it. North of Gander, while on the way to Twillingate, we happened to come across the Boyd's Cove Museum, which is all about the Beothuk people and is located at a former Beothuk summer fishing camp. I have to admit I'd heard the name before, but I knew nothing about this people. I can't escape the thought that the response of the Beothuk to the unexpected arrival of the Europeans has a moral of some sort. Unlike the Inuit, the Beothuk avoided contact with the newcomers, being pushed back into the interior of Newfoundland. But as the Europeans spread out and colonized the land, violence was the inevitable result. As a people, they were extinct by June 6, 1829, when the last known survivor, Shinadithit, died of tuberculosis in St. John's, Newfoundland. It's a sad story, but it's a very well done museum and archaeological site. From Twillingate, we use that town as a headquarters from which to do a day trip to North Change Island. The destination for many tourists is the slightly more distant Fogo Island, the largest offshore island of Newfoundland. It is accessible from the same ferry terminal. But travel to Fogo demands, because of the ferry schedule, an overnight stay, and we didn't have a hotel room booked there. But Change Island is also very quaint and is a traditional fishing village and well worth a visit. The car ferry ride's not long at all. You'll want to see the Old Shop Museum, which is just chock full of everything old. Very old, very, very old, or just old. Unfortunately, no video is allowed inside, but the still pictures are okay. Camping once again. There's nothing an old guy and woman and dog like to do more than squeeze into a small tent and lay on the hard ground. Let's not even get into urine bottles. You're welcome. Camping enthusiasts will need to book their campsites well in advance. The Parks Canada reservation website opens for use between the middle of March to the middle of April each year. The site address is reservation.pc.gc.ca. Melody Head Campground is a part of Terra Nova Provincial Park. If you're there, don't miss out the nearby Mill Cove Lookout Trail just off the highway to the west. St. John's, Newfoundland, not to be confused with St. John, New Brunswick, is a delightful small city with a lot of history. We found the ghostly walking tour, the St. John's Haunted Hike, to be well worth it. There are some steps to climb, as the city is built on a hill, and it might be a bit challenging for the elderly. Well-mannered dogs on leashes are acceptable. Now, to say goodbye to Newfoundland and head on to the south demands a ferry boat ride. The website you want to see is marineatlantic.ca. Remember that your booking should be well in advance. I found cabins were booking up almost a year in advance. Mind you, as the ferry pulled away from the dock, there were a number of cabins which were unsold, and I guess some travelers end up having to cancel the trip at the last moment. Unsold cabins are offered to the public as the ship pulls out of port. There was a lineup of people who snatched these cabins up, and after a half hour or so, there was a general PA announcement announcing that all the cabins were now sold. Many younger people just slept sitting up in their seats, which is certainly cheaper. There are two options for the departure port. From Port aux Basques in the southwest extremity of Newfoundland to North Sydney, Nova Scotia, it's a 7-hour crossing which operates year-round. The crossing we chose was the 18-hour one leaving from Argentia in the southeast of Newfoundland. This one operates from June till September only. COVID-19 put a crimp on things, unfortunately, with the main dining room closed. I really wanted to see that. But there was a buffet in operation, and I was able to find enough to eat which was gluten-free. Check the website for up-to-date information. One recent change in the ferry is the availability of a few pet-friendly cabins. The policy was adopted shortly before our trip. I believe they are all of the 4 bunk bed class of cabin. Until this change, all dogs were required to be kept in a hard plastic, lockable travel kennel, which you were responsible for bringing with you, or your pet could remain in your car for the 16 hours. Now, these options are still available. If bringing a kennel, you are charged for the size of the kennel. The kennels are kept in a single room communicating to the outside of the ship. There's a steel box there with a sand floor for the relief of your pet. Good luck. And a portion of the steel deck outside the room can also be used as a comfort station as well. Good luck with that again. I would suppose most dogs will just hold it for the duration of the crossing. Puertera visited the steel box and had a walk along the steel deck, but she was unimpressed with both. In my opinion, if you don't have a pet-friendly cabin for your crossing, the cheaper and easier plan is to leave your dog in the car. You won't be able to visit, however. There is no public allowed on the car decks during the crossing. If your pet is in the public area, you'll need a fixed leash of no more than 6 feet or 2 meters in length, and a muzzle for any quick transit through these areas. You can't hang around any public areas with your dog. Tara was never faulted for not wearing a muzzle, and we did have one with us, although we never used it. We used her extension leash, which extends up to 25 feet, but we kept it locked at 6 feet, and nobody said anything. Now, one thing may be of interest to you. Did you notice in my videos my saying things like 10:59? Or like 11:46. The car's dash cam records everything continually, and as I found out at the beginning of the trip, that's a lot of video to review. In the end, when seeing something that I wanted to keep, I would say the Eastern Daylight Time for the event to Ramona as we drove along, and she would text that number to me. So I had a record for later. At the end of the day, I would only have to download that particular file, and usually the file on either side of that just for safety, and then incorporate those files into the video for the day. So again, if you have any questions on beautiful Newfoundland, I'll happily try to answer each one. Next time we're going to examine the last portion of our tour, Nova Scotia. Bye to then.